Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're really glad you're spending some time with us today, whether you're relaxing at home, out for a walk, or winding down before sleep. I'm Sophia.
And I'm Jake. Today's topic is something a lot of people deal with almost every single day.
That's right. Today we're talking about overthinking, why it happens, how it affects our emotions and daily lives, and how to describe these feelings naturally in English.
Overthinking is a very modern problem. So many people walk around feeling mentally exhausted because their minds never fully switch off. Constant thoughts, endless worries, replaying old conversations, imagining the worst possible outcome. The brain just refuses to quiet down.
And for English learners, this is actually a really valuable topic. Emotional conversations are a huge part of sounding fluent and natural. Knowing how to describe your thoughts, your stress, your anxiety, that makes your English feel real and human. All right, Jake, let me ask you something personal. Do you overthink a lot?
Honestly, yes, probably more than I'd like to admit. I think a lot of people are in the same boat, though.
What kinds of things do you tend to overthink?
Social situations mostly. After a conversation, I sometimes replay the whole thing in my head over and over. I start wondering, did I say something awkward? Did that come out strange? What does that person think of me now?
That is incredibly common. People do that far more than they ever let on. Overthinking often happens quietly, deep inside someone's mind, especially for people who are thoughtful or emotionally sensitive.
Insensitive people notice emotional details very deeply, which sounds like a gift, but it can become absolutely draining over time.
Exhausting is a key word here. Overthinking doesn't just tire the body, it drains the mind completely. For example, constant worry becomes mentally exhausting after a while.
Another thing I've noticed is that overthinkers often spend enormous energy worrying about problems that never actually happen. The mind starts constructing disaster scenarios that exist entirely in the imagination.
Anxiety and overthinking are deeply connected. And modern life makes it worse. Social media, constant comparison, busy schedules, pressure from every direction. The brain is given endless reasons to stay switched on. Let's introduce our first useful sentence pattern. A very natural one is, I tend to overthink blank. For example, I tend to overthink social situations. Or, I tend to overthink big decisions. Native speakers use tend to all the time when describing habits or personality patterns.
Another great one is, my mind keeps thinking about blank. For example, my mind keeps thinking about the future. Or, my mind keeps replaying that conversation from earlier today.
Replay is such a useful emotional vocabulary word. It means repeatedly revisiting something in your memory, especially awkward or painful moments.
Especially the awkward ones. Why is that always the case?
Nobody knows.
So why do people overthink so much? What do you think is the root of it?
I think one big reason is fear. Fear of failure, embarrassment, rejection, making the wrong choice.
That makes a lot of sense. Overthinking is often connected to a deep need for control. The brain tries to mentally map out every possible problem before it happens, almost like a form of self-protection.
But here's the irony. Overthinking usually creates more stress, not less. Instead of solving problems, the mind gets caught in what I'd call mental noise, a constant stream of internal worry and chatter.
Mental noise is such an accurate phrase, especially at night.
Nights are genuinely difficult for overthinkers. During the day, there are distractions, work, people, tasks. But at night, everything goes quiet externally, and that's exactly when things get louder internally.
Past mistakes, future worries, major life questions, embarrassing memories from 5 years ago that have absolutely no business being in your head at midnight.
The brain has terrible timing.
The strange thing is that overthinking often feels irrational even to the person experiencing it. Rational means logical and grounded. Overthinking is often emotional rather than rational. Even when people know they're worrying too much, they still can't stop.
Here's another very natural sentence pattern. Sometimes I get stuck thinking about blank. For example, sometimes I get stuck thinking about the future. Or, sometimes I get stuck thinking about mistakes I've made. The phrase, get stuck thinking, sounds completely natural in everyday English.
Another common experience worth mentioning is decision anxiety, overthinking choices. Some people become paralyzed when they have to make a decision because they're terrified of choosing wrong.
Especially big life decisions. Career changes, relationships, moving somewhere new.
The mind starts asking, what if I regret this? What if there was a better option? What if I fail? Overthinking traps people between possibilities.
Which leads to what's sometimes called emotional paralysis, feeling mentally unable to move forward or take any action at all. Instead of helping, overthinking becomes a form of avoidance.
And avoidance almost always makes anxiety worse in the long run.
Something interesting I've noticed is that overthinkers are often very self-aware people.
Definitely. Self-awareness is usually a positive trait, but too much of it can become exhausting. When every word, every interaction, every small moment gets analyzed under a microscope, that's when it tips into something unhealthy.
Especially for people who struggle with social anxiety. Social anxiety and overthinking tend to fuel each other. A person worries about a social situation, then they overthink the conversation afterward, which makes them even more anxious the next time. It becomes a difficult cycle to break.
Let's teach another useful expression. A very natural one is, I keep worrying about blank. For example, I keep worrying about the future, or I keep worrying about what other people think of me. Native speakers use keep worrying when they want to describe thoughts that repeat themselves persistently.
And another good one, my thoughts won't slow down. That sentence sounds emotionally honest and completely natural. For example, sometimes my thoughts won't slow down at night. Or, when I'm stressed, my thoughts won't slow down no matter what I do.
I think modern technology has made all of this significantly worse.
Without a doubt. Phones, notifications, social media, an endless flood of information. The brain almost never gets true silence anymore. And on top of that, people are constantly comparing themselves to others online.
Which is incredibly damaging. Social media shows people's highlight reels, the best moments, the most flattering photos, the most successful milestones, not the ordinary or difficult parts of life.
And so people end up comparing their real, messy, complicated everyday lives to someone else's carefully edited public image. That comparison creates insecurity, and insecurity feeds overthinking in a very direct way.
Questions like, do they actually like me? Did I sound foolish? Am I doing enough? Am I enough? Those thoughts, repeated over and over, become emotionally draining.
Draining, another key vocabulary word. Something emotionally draining wears you down slowly over time, like a battery losing power.
There's also a strong link between overthinking and perfectionism.
Perfectionists are almost always overthinkers. Because they have such an intense fear of making mistakes, they want every decision, every word, every action to be flawless. And since perfection is simply not achievable, they end up in a constant state of worry and dissatisfaction.
Overthinking and perfectionism create a kind of mental trap. You keep turning things over and over, looking for the perfect answer that doesn't exist.
I think it's worth saying, though, most overthinkers are genuinely caring people. The instinct to think deeply, to be thoughtful, to consider consequences, those are not bad qualities.
Not at all. The problem begins when that thoughtfulness becomes excessive and starts undermining emotional health.
There's a real difference between healthy reflection and what psychologists sometimes call rumination. Rumination means dwelling on negative thoughts repeatedly, often without reaching any resolution. It's like a mental hamster wheel. You keep running, but you never actually get anywhere.
And perhaps the saddest part of overthinking is what it does to the present moment. Instead of being fully in an experience, the mind is stuck somewhere else, worrying about the future or replaying the past.
Let's look at another sentence pattern. My brain immediately assumes blank. For example, my brain immediately assumes something went wrong. Or, my brain immediately assumes people are judging me. The word assume is really useful in emotional conversations. It describes when the mind jumps to conclusions without enough evidence.
Another very relatable experience: overthinking other people's reactions. Many overthinkers replay social interactions for hours afterward, searching for signs of rejection or disapproval, even in tiny, meaningless details.
And often, what feels like a major embarrassing moment to the overthinker was completely forgotten by everyone else within minutes.
Something that still haunts me from 8 years ago probably never crossed that person's mind again.
Exactly. Overthinking creates the illusion that other people are paying far more attention to us than they actually are. Most people are too focused on their own lives and worries to spend much time thinking about yours.
That's actually quite freeing when you think about it.
Something else many overthinkers struggle with is genuine relaxation. Even when life slows down, the mind doesn't.
Because silence gives thoughts more room to grow. For some people, quiet is peaceful. For overthinkers, it can feel uncomfortable, almost threatening.
Which is why so many people constantly fill the silence. Phones, videos, music, endless scrolling. Often without even realizing they're doing it, people use distraction to avoid sitting with their own thoughts.
And avoidance might bring temporary relief, but it usually increases anxiety over the long term. The thoughts don't go away, they just wait.
There's a word for this: confronting. To confront something means to face it directly rather than turning away. Many overthinkers find it very difficult to confront their emotions head on.
Here's something interesting. Overthinking often feels productive. That's one reason it's so hard to stop.
Exactly. Thinking deeply about something can feel useful, like you're working toward a solution. But there's a point where thinking stops creating answers and just starts repeating itself endlessly.
A mental loop. Repetitive thoughts that keep cycling through the mind without resolution. For example, I got stuck in a mental loop all night. Or, anxiety often creates repetitive mental loops.
And what drives a lot of those loops is the search for certainty. People want to know that everything will be okay. But life doesn't offer guarantees. Relationships are uncertain, careers are uncertain, the future is uncertain. And that uncertainty is genuinely difficult for overthinkers to sit with.
Learning to tolerate uncertainty is one of the most important skills someone who struggles with overthinking can develop. Not finding the perfect answer, just becoming comfortable with not knowing.
Let's add another sentence pattern. I keep replaying blank in my head. For example, I keep replaying that conversation in my head, or I keep replaying my mistakes in my head. In my head is a very natural phrase for discussing internal thoughts and feelings.
And one more. I can't stop thinking about blank. For example, I can't stop thinking about what might happen. Or, I can't stop thinking about what I said earlier.
We should also talk about overthinking and sleep, because the two are deeply connected.
Nighttime is when overthinkers really struggle. With all external distractions removed, the mind suddenly has nothing to focus on except its own thoughts. Problems that seemed manageable during the day can feel enormous at 2 in the morning.
And when sleep suffers, emotional regulation suffers too. A tired brain has far less capacity to manage anxious thoughts, which means more overthinking, which means worse sleep. It's a cycle that feeds itself.
Sleep anxiety is increasingly common, especially among people dealing with high levels of stress or burnout.
Burnout is worth explaining. It refers to a state of deep exhaustion caused by prolonged stress, where a person feels completely depleted physically and emotionally. Burnout and overthinking often go hand in hand.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about something more hopeful: how to start managing overthinking, and how to speak about it more naturally in English.
Good idea. Let's review the sentence patterns we've covered today and put them together into something that sounds natural.
A fluent, emotionally honest answer might sound like this. Lately, I've been overthinking my future a lot. Sometimes my thoughts keep going in circles, especially at night. I know I worry too much, but it's genuinely difficult to stop.
That sounds completely natural. And the key is adding emotional detail. Not just I'm stressed, but describing how the stress feels and what triggers it.
One important thing many people gradually learn is that not every thought deserves attention. Just because the mind creates a thought doesn't mean that thought is true, important, or worth following.
Healthy thinking isn't the absence of thought. It's the ability to have thoughts without getting completely consumed by them. Consumed, meaning overwhelmed or taken over entirely. For example, she became consumed by anxiety, or he was consumed by negative thoughts.
And sometimes the healthiest thing a person can do is simply let a thought pass. Notice it, and then let it move on without feeding it emotionally.
I think one of the most powerful shifts for overthinkers is this realization. Thinking deeply is not the problem. Caring deeply is not the problem. The problem begins when thinking turns into endless fear instead of useful reflection.
Let's do a quick speaking exercise before we close. If you can, try answering these questions out loud. Speaking practice is one of the best ways to make emotional vocabulary feel natural and automatic. Question 1. What kinds of things do you tend to overthink the most? Question 2. Why do you think so many